To India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 36. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
But this summer, we're taking a little bit of a break from having guests on to do a travel tips series. And today we are talking about searching for good flights.
Yes,
So
which
I'm
is
sure this is
unnecessary if it's a road trip.
fair. Okay. In that case, I guess maybe, I don't know. I was going to say searching for good routes, but that's a very different method than searching for good flights.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I just thought of one thing. We've never talked about searching for good hotels. So, maybe in a future summer, we'll have to
Oh, there you
tackle
go.
that craziness. So,
Yeah.
yeah. This is probably a daunting topic to people, I would guess.
It is for me.
Yeah. It can be for me as well. Or even it was so funny because I was just talking to a coworker about some of the good deals I've gotten on flights. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I have to try that because this is how much we paid for this. And I was like, you paid that much for flights, but also a lot of airlines, you're just kind of like, I guess I have to, and so it can feel really limiting to do that. So yeah, I have a tip up front before we get into it though.
Go for it. What's your tip?
So I just booked my honeymoon, and which we'll hear about way down the road.
Way down the road.
But I did go through a travel agent, and I want to talk more about that in a little bit. But one thing is she was like, okay, and then your flight there's an hour and a half layover at the Paris airport. And I was like, no. And one thing is I was like, I'm not doing an hour and a half layover. That's way too short. If something goes wrong, if I get in a long line, if there's a delay, anything like that. And then also, if I can ever choose to, I don't want to fly through the Paris airport. So she switched it to
Because
a
you
4.5.
don't like the Paris airport?
Just as far as how long it can take to get through it. It can take a long amount of time. And then, so she switched it to a 4.5 layover in Amsterdam, which I am stoked about because I love the Amsterdam airport and I would recommend it to anybody. I think it's a really good one. And so, so here's a little tip when you're flying internationally, say no to the hour and a half layover. It sounds great. It sounds like I'm just going to go walk on the other plane. But if there's delays or if you get stuck in really long lines or any form of a customs, anything, then all of a sudden that just eats up your time and that gets pretty scary. So
Yeah, I think it depends on exactly what your overall flight itinerary is, because if you've got that hour and a half layover and that is your entry point into either a country or if it's Europe, the EU, then you will be going through customs and immigration, and that takes more time. If it's, let's say you've already flown to Europe and you're in the EU and you're flying to another country in Europe and there's a layover in between those, that might not be too short.
yeah, I think just I haven't had a lot of flight delays, but I know when they happen, it's just kind of a bummer. If that means, if you have a half an hour delay, even all of a sudden you just have an hour layover, and that can be, I guess it depends on the size of the airport too, because if you're in a small airport,
Sure.
that's not as big of a deal. But
Sure.
in those massive airports where you're hauling across the airport, yeah, I did the Paris airport with an hour layover one time, and the only reason I made it to my gate was because I was traveling. was traveling with someone who I had just met, and we weren't even having the same connecting flight, but we happened to have the same flight there.
Interesting.
And we met at this conference, and we're like, oh, we're on the same flight. And so she was like, oh, no, you only have an hour layover. And she had the Delta Sky Priority. And I remember that term because she was saying she got real pushy in a wonderful way and was like, we're Sky Priority. And so she like got me through that airport. We were able to skip lines and all this stuff. And she was like, if anyone questions it, I'm just going to say you're my travel companion. You have to come with me. But no one even questioned it because she was. And so since I was with her, I could just go with her. And like, I would have not made my flight even close if I hadn't been with a Sky Priority person. And so ever since then I've been a little more, because I'm pretty positive with a lot of things, and I'm just like, oh, we'll make it. And then after that experience I was just like, nope, I'm not messing with that. So I don't know, in the States maybe that's not so bad, but it's between countries that can be a little iffy. So
sure,
yeah, there's my first tip. Two tips because don't fly through Paris and choose Amsterdam instead. Yeah.
Yeah, that works as a tip. That totally works.
Oh, man. So what are your thoughts on searching for good flights, Ryan?
Well, I think I'm going to offer sort of a big picture overview first, and then I think we can dive into some more specifics of exactly how we might go about it. But my big picture overview would be use some sort of site that can help you check a whole bunch of different airlines. So that could be Kayak, that could be Expedia, that could be Google Flights, and we can talk about a bunch of those in more detail in a little bit. But when you actually find the flight that you want and that you think you're going to book, I recommend go to the website of the actual airline and book it through the airline instead of through the conglomerate. And I say that just like your tip was out of an experience that was not great. I had an experience where we bought tickets. I don't remember where it was. It was somewhere in Europe. And we bought it through, a third party, whatever, because it was cheaper. And then I wanted to make a change. I don't remember exactly why. Just the timing was poor. And I was like, hey, can I make this change? And I go up to the desk and I'm talking to the people and they look up my information and they said, yeah, you didn't book that through us, so we can't actually do anything. You have to contact them to make any changes to your tickets.
Oh,
and
no.
I've also heard and read other stories of things where if you book through somebody else and the flight time changes or, any of those other things that can happen, you may or may not be notified. Whereas if you book through the airline itself, you do. And I think that's in the airline's best interest to make it worthwhile to book through them. And in my experience, the airlines have the prices that are equal to anything that I found on any of the conglomerate sites, or sometimes they'll be slightly cheaper. But it's only plus or minus, say, $15 for a ticket. And for me, the peace of mind of knowing, hey, if something happens, if something changes, I'm good. I can talk to the airline and we can make something happen. That to me is worth it, even if it is an extra, $25 or whatever.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of like, whose customer are you? And are you their customer? And so they're going to help you out and everything. Yeah. Actually, my fiance worked in hotels for like 10 years and he said he hates Expedia and things like that because they take a pretty big cut, and so the business actually doesn't get as much anyway from it. And he's like, no, with hotels it's its own beast because hotels are times you can negotiate things down. I guess I haven't tried that, but he said oftentimes if something's last minute, you could probably get a cut price from them as well, as opposed to going through this other one. And so and those ones have already bought the nights at the hotels and then they're reselling it, I guess, something like that.
Interesting.
And so it was just interesting, he was not a fan. So he kind of has the same thoughts with hotels where he's like, book your room with the hotel themselves, and everything.
Yeah.
And so, I think some of the third party sites just kind of scare me a little bit as far as like, okay, like, how is it really going to be?
Cheapo Air.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a real one, actually.
Mhm.
And actually I've been part of a group that booked through Cheapo Air.
Mm.
And, it worked, but again, I think that was actually the trip where we didn't, they couldn't make changes for us. That might have been through them. I don't remember.
Mm. Yeah, that's a little scary too.
So.
Oh man. Well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I have been reading up online a little bit about this, and one thing interesting that I've never considered, one of the tips to finding good prices is to keep your searches top secret, because based on the cookies in your browser, sometimes the prices can increase based on repeatedly doing the same search.
Yep, I've definitely heard that to use, private browsing or secret browsing or incognito or whatever your particular browser calls it, so that they can't track what you're visiting. I've tried it both ways and haven't really noticed a difference myself, but I'm also not checking airline flights all the time. If I was flying often enough, it might be something that I would notice.
That's interesting. Well, and I'm also curious, like, are these like the third party sites that are doing that, or are they like the airlines themselves? Like, who is actually increasing the prices?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know if I believe like every single business is doing it.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting idea, just to use the incognito. So if anyone knows more about that, we would love to hear about that, actually.
Yeah.
So because that's like, it could be so true, because I totally believe that, like, I mean, we've all had those targeted ads and things like that. I mean, the internet certainly knows that I'm engaged right now. And so I cannot tell you how many wedding photographers I have seen advertise on Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And so, so I'm like not naive to that. And then also I'm kind of curious, like, what does that actually mean that these prices are increasing for one person based on their browsing history? So, yeah, that was an interesting one.
Yeah. I think if it's okay with you, we can talk through a little bit how we actually search for flights when we're searching.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. So what do you do?
So I typically will use, because I'm a data person, right? I teach science, numbers mean a lot to me, so I like data, which means I don't just use one site. I use many different sites, and I compare between them. And yes, at this point in time, most of them return the same information, but they return it in different ways. So Kayak has been around for a long time, as far as these sorts of things go. I like Kayak because it has just kayak.com, like the boat. And I like that it has a lot of different filters and things that you can put into it. And then sometimes it will give you a recommendation on whether they think, and it's a prediction, and they're very, very clear that, hey, we're not guaranteeing this or anything, but they have a prediction on whether the price that you're seeing is likely to go up or go down or stay pretty consistent.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's useful. And you can, down the left-hand side, there's all sorts of filters. So if you don't want, you can filter between exactly what hours you want to fly, or certain airports that you do or don't want to go through. So you could say not Paris, for example, or airlines that you do or don't want to fly through, or all of these different things that you could do. That's really nice to kind of tailor what you want. So that one's nice. It also has been around long enough that sometimes I find the user interface a little cluttered sometimes, but it also gives you that flexibility. So there's that. Skyscanner is another one that I've used a little bit. I know some people that will say that, hey, Skyscanner has like the cheapest flights almost all the time. I haven't used it enough to be able to say that reliably. In my experience, it's very comparable. I don't tend to see things that are very different between all the sites, but Skyscanner can be useful. A relatively new one is Google Flights.
Yes. I like Google Flights.
I do too. The user interface is nice and clean and simple. Most of these, and Google Flights is one of them, most of them will allow you to track flights. And I think this might be where some of those cookies that you're talking about come in. But you can say, hey, I want to watch this, and then they'll send you email updates if prices go up or prices go down or
That's
whatever.
cool.
The thing that I like about Google Flights is if you sign up for that, I don't care a ton about the actual email notification. I don't necessarily want the email notification because just because it went down now doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to go right back up again, or it gets confusing. But one of the things that I have been on a quest for, there's lots of information online that tells you when is the right time to buy a flight.
That's cool. Yeah.
60 days before the flight, 120 days before the flight, on Tuesdays, after 3 p.m., like all of these things about these perfect times to get the perfect deals and all these things. And so what I've been doing with my flight to Ireland that I've mentioned many times on this podcast is we already bought our tickets. We bought our tickets months ago, but I kept the tracker on. Because if I keep the tracker on, it actually has a graph that shows me how the price has changed since I started tracking it. So I can see as I'm looking that I started tracking apparently 112 days ago.
Okay.
And I have a nice graph that shows me exactly how much the price has changed and when it has changed over the last 112 days.
That's cool.
And so I can get data myself as opposed to just reading all these websites. And granted, this is one flight through one airline, but it still gives me a good idea, and actually have a second flight underneath it as well. And what I'm actually seeing is there's not a ton of variability.
Interesting.
There is variability.
It might just be what it's going to be.
I mean, there is variability when it definitely spikes and then a few times when it drops. But for the most part, things are fairly consistent with a few just kind of fluctuations of $100 or $200. But there aren't a ton of huge jumps. And even when there are, they seem to come back down within a few days.
Interesting.
Which I find
wow, but the graph, that's kind of fun. I
do
that.
like the graph.
So that makes you not really kick yourself for when you bought your flight then.
Yeah. And it's also part of this for me is future, thinking ahead. So if I have an idea when those things, when things go up and when they go down and about where they are, that whatever the next trip is that I buy tickets for, that'll give me an idea, and I can always come back and review these graphs later.
That's cool.
Because they keep it for the whole time that you've tracked the flight.
For me, something that I have done is just asked the internet what are the busy seasons for whatever place I'm considering going to. I, with my current job, there's not really a time of year where it's like, oh yeah, this is the best time to take time off or whatever. And so as far as future vacation goes for me, I think it's just going to depend on where I want to go, and what's, but it's kind of the combination of really to me, I'd love to visit places on shoulder season, which is not the worst time to visit there, but also not the quote unquote best time to visit there, because the best time to visit there is also the most expensive time to visit there. And probably even worse than that, the most crowded time to visit there. And I would say that's even the biggest downside.
Oh, for sure. So typically, when is shoulder season? Obviously, it varies from place to place, but typically, when is shoulder season?
I'm guessing, I think a lot are spring and fall, because so many people travel in the summer. Now for you, you're in a situation where your vacation dates are a lot of people's vacation dates. So you just kind of have to do what you're going to do. and
Yeah.
everything.
Yep. So
And
like
so-
my trip to Ireland, I'm traveling with my friends Serena and Tom, and they typically will travel. They usually do their trips in September, which is kind of the beginning of shoulder season, or
Yeah.
one of the shoulder seasons, right?
Yeah.
And I can't travel in September. That's pretty much the busiest month of my year.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just not an option to travel in September. But for this particular trip for Ireland, because of how far north we are and because of the weather, they were willing, and because they're really nice people and were willing to let me come with them, they were willing to look at doing it in the summer instead. And yeah, it's going to be a whole lot busier than if we were to go at a different time of year. But for this particular trip, again, because of the weather in Ireland and things, they were like, hey, that might actually work out okay in this case.
Yeah. So when I went to Italy a couple of years ago, which I talk about a lot, I went in March because I think May is when it really picks up. And then I ended up not wanting to go in April because that year, that's when Easter is when we were
Yep.
considering going in April. And so I was like, I don't really want to, like, it was something where I was like, if we're in Rome on Easter, like, that's what we're doing in Rome, is
Yeah.
doing Easter. And like, would be so cool. I've heard really cool things about being in Rome on Easter, but like, we're not really doing anything else, in that case. And so, so I guess that was nice just to do March, but not do like January necessarily,
Right.
Or let's see, I'm trying to get other good examples. It just kind of depends on where you're going, because there are times when like if you're going to go to Death Valley, that's going to be a different time when it's going to be nice
Sure.
to visit. And so, or a lot of places like spring break is going to be crazy just because of people's schedules, not even necessarily because of when it's the nicest time to visit somewhere. So I would say like being aware of that. And so for me, even if I'm thinking, oh, at some point next fall, I want to go here, then I'm just going to start searching for tickets and do the monthly view, where you can see the price on different days on a monthly calendar. And that's really nice to just start clicking through just to get a general idea, kind of a further step back as far as when would be a good time to visit price-wise. Also, it's or like, oh, when I went to Spain in September, like August is crazy there. And then September, just everyone goes home. And all of a sudden, it's like, I mean, I was at like these really nice places where they were like, yeah, normally it's packed, but it's not tourist season anymore. So no one's here. And it was so great. So that was really fun because the weather was still amazing. So I guess I went there during shoulder season. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
So, and then I think another thing with thinking about kind of like when you even go is what day of the week you fly on.
Yep.
That's the other one. And again, it's a little tricky if you just have off work on a Monday to Friday and you want to go the whole time you're gone, you're probably going to fly on Saturday and then fly back on a Sunday
Yep.
and just suck it up. But those aren't going to be great days to fly back
No.
on.
But it also depends where you're flying. If you're flying internationally, the days are different than if you're flying domestically. Because when you fly within the U.S., during the week, you've got your business travelers who are traveling back and forth more regularly. And that comes into play. And now I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I feel like Mondays and Fridays domestically are not the best days to fly. And actually Saturday is a better day to fly domestically, because typically if you're just commuting, for lack of a better word, but like on a plane, you typically fly home Friday afternoon or Friday evening so that you can be home on Saturday.
Yeah.
So that kind of changes things a little bit too.
Sundays can be a rough one. I'm going to be going to Colorado Springs over the 4th of July, and which I think will be already have happened by the time this episode comes out, I'm pretty sure. But looking for, and the reason I wanted to travel then was because I was like, I only have to take off one day of work to get a 4-day weekend. And so that's pretty great.
Yeah.
And so the prices ended up being a little bit higher, not crazy high. And so we're flying out on a Wednesday night and back on a Sunday morning. I would have loved to fly back on Sunday night, but holy moly,
Yeah.
those on that holiday weekend,
Yep.
just, I mean, those prices got really high.
Yep.
And so it was like, we're flying home Sunday morning and that's fine. So,
And that's one of
Yeah.
those things that, again, a lot of those sites like Kayak or Skyscanner or Google Flights, like you said, you can oftentimes get some sort of graphical interface that'll show you those things. I was just looking at Google Flights. So it gives a whole bunch of different options of things along the top. But one of the things that you can do is there's a date grid that I think is kind of what you were talking about, Cheryl, where it kind of gives you a table that shows where things are the cheapest, depending like to leave. But they also have a price graph. Again, I like the graphs that shows you the same length of your trip. If you were to shift it by X number of days, how the price varies. So for example, I'm looking at my trip to Ireland, and the day we're leaving is a Thursday. And right now it's showing that it's about, for the tickets we're looking at, like $1,500 for what we're looking for. But if we leave the following day on Friday, it's $2,200.
ooh, boy.
But it actually shows you that in a graph so you can see how that varies depending on when you leave. And so like you're saying, there's a lot of those resources that are available because yes, it does matter the day you're leaving or the time.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny because one time my sister and her husband were booking a flight somewhere domestically. And what they ended up doing was calculating how much they made in a day. And then, because I think both of them, I forget what the details were, but they were like, is the ticket more, like, what costs more for us to skip another day of work or to pay for the more expensive ticket? And so they realized actually in that case, the more expensive ticket was worth it because it was less of a difference than what they make in a day. And it was like, you know what? Like, fair point too, because if you're thinking about what is your time worth or things like that, it's like I think flexibility is important with travel, and I think that's another reason to plan and think in advance on what days do I want to take off and all of those things. And then also remembering like sometimes just paying that extra bit, it's like, oh, that's still less than, and so it's just interesting to like evaluate in that way.
Yeah.
Even,
Yeah. And I've done something similar. I think I've mentioned this earlier on when we talked about, what's your travel splurge? I think the guest asked us that at one point. And for me, it's the premium economy that has more legroom. And one of the first times that I thought about it, I had bought the regular seats and I was looking at maybe upgrading on the flight home from Europe. And I was trying to decide. And one of my friends mentioned, she's like, well, break it down with the number of hours and the cost. And I think she said, is it worth, and I think it was something like $30 an hour. Is it worth $30 an hour to you? And I was like, oh, yeah, when you put it that way, it totally is. Because instead of seeing like the big dollar amount, I was like, oh, if that's what it is, yes, I'll pay $30 for a much more comfortable hour. So, again, putting it in context can be helpful because I think there'd be other people who would say, oh, no, $30 an hour, definitely not worth it to me.
Yeah, I would say no. Yeah. I would say I'd rather, or if I have the money to spend $30 an hour for so many hours on something, there are a lot of other things I would want to do with that money, Sure. And so if that's still part of my budget,
legs, they're a lot shorter than mine.
And so that because of that, we have some different priorities because I'm perfectly comfortable in a regular seat, and so
there's nothing comfortable about a regular seat.
So I want to talk a little bit about my method with domestic flights because that happens a lot more frequently than international flights for me. Sure. So I fly Alaska.
Me too.
And I'm guessing the reason both of us do is ultimately because we live in Seattle, and that's the hub.
It's their main hub.
Hub is the right word, right? Yeah.
Yep, hub. And from here, they almost always have the cheapest flights.
Yes.
Like I kind of stopped even shopping around for domestic flights.
Me too. Yeah,
because Alaska is
actually.
almost always the cheapest, and they're super convenient for us.
And they
here in
fly for
Seattle.
us. They fly direct to so many
So many
locations.
places.
I've
Yeah.
known people who've flown from LA to Seattle and done a layover, and that's just baffling to
Why?
me because it's such a short flight. But like, and it just makes me wonder, like, what type of searches are people doing, or like. And so, I think that's the thing though, is like if you live in another city and maybe you're more loyal to another airline, but you can only get there with a layover, I think that's where I would switch to looking at other airlines. So like
Oh, sure.
if I was looking at an Alaska flight to somewhere and I had to do a layover, I'd be like, well, do I have to? And that's where I would look
Right.
at other flights. Because
Right.
honestly, any domestic flight, I feel like, really? A layover? And sometimes you need to, or if you live in a small town and you're next to a way smaller airport. I used to live out in Yakima in Eastern Washington, and there's an airport there, and the only flights are to and from Seattle. And so it was like, well, I guess I'm doing a layover in my hometown airport.
Yep.
But so, yeah, what I do with Alaska, I have the credit card, and so I get points that turn into miles for money I spend, and you get more miles when you're spending money on their flights. So,
Sure.
pretty, look at them go. And so, I use it sometimes, but then I certainly use it if I'm booking a flight,
Right.
And so that's great. And then I'm on their email list, and I like getting their emails because they'll send out like, oh, for the next few days, there's better deals on if you use your miles to book these things, or here's some. They call them sales, and I'm
Sure.
sure it's all, I don't know, but and so I
marketing,
like to
yeah.
look at their sales, and so and then
Yeah.
in general I just like to I also like to look at their sales because money is not something that I'm super great with, and estimating or different things like that. And so I work hard to keep it in my mind and pay attention to what is a good deal on something. And so when it comes to flights, like I look
When
at
the
flight
price
prices a
changes all the
lot.
time.
Yeah, I look at flight prices a lot because I want to know, is this a good price or a bad price
Yes.
for this city that I want to go to? And I've flown to LA and San Diego very many times. And so anything under $100, I would say,
Oh, that'd be
Go ahead.
amazing.
and I get that all the time. And so
I don't.
and and so it's just something where it's like, regardless of how far out it is from when I'm going, if I can get that price, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna jump on it. And so yeah, I think that I like their emails and I often just scroll through what their sales are and everything, just because I want to keep familiarizing myself with that. And then also I'll have it in my mind, like 6 months from now, I think I'm going here. And I'll just kind of keep checking every once in a while, and
Yeah.
stuff. And I even have the app, so I can just even check on the app. And
Yep.
yeah, so I like that. And then something that I like to do when I do choose to spend my miles is if you book a flight with only miles, then when you take the flight, you don't get mileage credit for that flight.
That makes sense.
If you book a flight with partial miles and partial cash, then you get the mileage credit for the whole flight.
Ah, you got a little mileage hack there.
Yes. I learned this one from my dad. He used to travel a lot for business, so he's taught me. He's also the one that told me the seat trick of if you're flying with someone to book the aisle and the window
Right.
and hope that someone doesn't book the seat in between you. And then even if they do, now you're the kind neighbor who is giving them a better seat so that you
Yeah.
can sit together.
Yep.
And it works. That's worked sometimes, or then I've gotten just an empty seat and you get 3 seats for 2 people. So that's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
But so that's a nice one. And then with mileage, a good price is anything where you can get a penny per mile or a better price than that. So what I will do is, like, if I'm
okay.
considering spending mileage on a flight, I'll search the exact same flights with just cash and the exact same flights with partial cash, partial miles, and see, like, with just paying for the flight, how much is it, and then to see, like, am I getting a good enough price that I should use my miles on this flight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I do miles. So, and I don't spend it very often. But then it's nice because if there's ever a good miles deal, I want to be able to jump on that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. I have one more website I would like to suggest.
Okay.
And it's one that I don't think most people have heard of. And I really like it. It's called Momondo.
I have not heard of that.
Mondo.
Sounds pretty fake. So
It's
cool.
not though. Mondo. Momondo. And it's another, conglomerate like Google Flights or Kayak or whatever. But one of the things that I really like about it is it has a couple of tabs along the top after you've searched. And it defaults to the cheapest. So it'll list, cheapest to most expensive, which is what most of them do. But then it has two other main tabs. It has a quickest. So when I'm flying internationally, I don't want to spend 72 hours getting there if I can do it in 14. But it may be cheaper to do that. So I like to be able to see, what's the fastest way?
Mm.
And then they have
That's
their
nice.
own tab that they call the best. So they run their algorithm and they weigh cost versus travel time and determine which ones they rate as the best.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a really neat feature because it really, the old adage, time is money, but it really does, kind of like you're saying, help you better quantify what do you value, right? Are you willing to pay a little bit more to get there faster, or are you willing to take more time to save a little bit of money?
I like that.
So, and then
That's
I said
good.
there's 3, but really 4, because there's also one that's custom that lets you kind of build your own ticket. But
That's really cool. That's a good
yeah.
idea.
yeah,
I like
so
that.
it's a good website. So I will oftentimes check there as well because I feel like they do some good stuff there. And then just as a side note, if you're ever booking travel, and Cheryl, you might enjoy this one, that isn't just flying. If you're booking trains or ferries or anything like that, roamtorio.com allows you
I've
to
heard
search.
of that one.
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it. Maybe
Okay.
when we were planning your trip to Spain, maybe.
Okay.
But roamtorio.com will allow you to search multiple travel options and compare the travel times and the costs. And it has local buses and trains and flights and all those things. So you can compare multiple travel types, which is nice.
I like that. That's cool. Let's see, what else do I have to say? If you ever have the chance to book a long layover that allows you to get into the city, it's pretty cool. I like
definitely
that
can be.
because there are times with flights where you just have to book a layover. And so anytime where something just doesn't fly direct, then
Yeah.
you have to. And so if you're going to spend like several hours on a layover, then it's kind of like, well, consider, can you get a similar price flight with a long enough layover that you could get out into the city and then see another place
Yeah.
without really adding much money to your trip?
Right. And sometimes saving money.
So let's hear about your experience with this. How have you
Well,
saved money on it?
I've just because of where I've flown in Central and Eastern Europe with Slovenia and Croatia, those are not necessarily major destinations that everybody goes to. So there are a lot fewer flights. So very often we have had relatively long layovers. And you could, if you were willing to pay more, get shorter layovers. But then that's allowed us to go out into the city. I've been out into Frankfurt multiple times. I've had several wish you were here's about things to do in Frankfurt because I've been out. And in the future from now when we're recording, but in the past from when you will be listening to this, I will be in Slovenia again, but our layover is, I think, about 4 hours in Frankfurt, which is just too short.
Yes.
It's not long enough to get out, to go through customs, to get all your stuff, to like get a locker to put, some of your bags if you needed to, and to get a train and to get into the city and see stuff and then get back. It's just not enough time, which I'm actually very disappointed.
Yeah.
Because it can be fun, especially when you're traveling, to just get out and stand up and walk around after you've been on the plane for a long time. Get out, get some actual food instead of airport food.
Yeah. And then do another
experience a
flight.
little
And it will
culture.
feel more like a separate flight
Yep.
as opposed to this weird, like, zombie existence that
Yep.
you're in.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
That's too bad.
that's okay.
Yeah, I've done the long layover only once, but I'm gonna do it in December.
Yeah.
On
In
my
Amsterdam.
honeymoon. Yeah. And I'm going to do that one on the way home. And I'm really excited about that because then we will already have adjusted to the time. And
Yes.
so we will not be crazy tired or anything. And so I'm excited about that. I did it in Paris on the way there. And so happy I did it. That's what worked out with the flights I was looking at and everything. Loved it. And then also, I felt just kind of weird and off that day because, I had just landed, in a totally different time zone and everything. And so
That was when you went to Spain?
yeah, a few years ago when I went to Spain.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say that is a fun opportunity that it would is kind of cool to look into. And so in that case, you would actually want to look at the longest travel time, but with only one layover, if
Right.
you were doing something like that.
Which a lot of the sites have filters where you can look for that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I would really suggest that. It's kind of a fun opportunity to take. And then, yeah, I've been really loving booking through a travel agent, actually. That's been something I've done, I think, 3 or 4 times now
Yeah.
through a AAA travel agent. I have a AAA membership, so I'm not paying anything for her.
Well, I think typically travel agents, I don't think you typically do pay them.
Okay. I'm not really familiar with it. So it's just kind of an interesting thing because I've only worked with this one travel agent, but I just love it because she spent a fair amount of time looking at combinations of flights for me. And I'm like, cool, that's great. So I spent some time up front looking at it so that I would know what is a good, what's a fair price from what
Yeah.
I'm finding
Yeah.
and what are flights that look good to me to give her some direction. Then also when she comes back to me with prices, I can be like, yes, no, and so, but also she searches for trips all the time,
Right.
you know?
She's faster at it. She has extra resources. She knows what she's
Yeah.
looking for.
Yeah, and so that's really cool. And then also just they get good deals. And so I think we booked for our honeymoon through her and she got us so she booked that long layover. I told her I really want a long layover in Amsterdam on the way home. Can you make it happen? So she figured it out. And so she booked for the 2 of us the round trip with 1 layover each direction. And then 5 nights of hotels. And she looked into what areas of town should you stay in the hotels and different things like that. And so and she just knows a lot about searching and stuff. And I think it was $2,000 total for all of that. And so
For both of you.
for both of us. Yeah.
That's a great deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I went to Spain, she got me an $850 ticket round trip to Spain. And I booked that one only a month and a half before I went or something crazy like that.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah. And so it's something where just knowing that I have her as a resource, I'll just email her and be like, what can you get me? And so, and knowing that if I'm going somewhere where I need hotels, she's going to get me even a better deal than if I
Yeah.
don't need the hotels. And so that's just, I like that a lot. It's really and been a good resource for me. So
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think for people, as we've talked to different people throughout the season so far on the podcast, there are people who really like to do the research, they like to find out the information, and there's other people who really don't. And I think travel agents are great for those people too, because
Yeah.
it's like, hey, this is not what I want to spend my time on. I want to spend my time on looking at cool things to do, or
Yeah.
getting excited, or planning my wardrobe, or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, that's one less thing to put on your plate to do if that's not something that you really want to do. Whereas there's
Yeah.
other people who really enjoy the research and like to find the best deal and all that. And so they can definitely take that on, and because that's part of what they enjoy. And
Yeah.
it's a great resource, I think. So that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I've been really happy about that. So that's been good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Can we invent teleporters, please? Because if we didn't have to fly, that would have my vote.
Oh man. I know. It'd be so good.
Or can someone please pay for Cheryl and I to fly first class internationally?
Ooh, actually, yeah.
We'll review it on the podcast.
Okay.
We will record on the airplane.
We'll also give you sponsorship time.
Yeah, we definitely will. For sure. International first class? Yes, please.
I like that plan. That's a good conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. Dream big, right?
Yeah. Oh man. Cool. I'm trying to think of my final thoughts are pay attention so that you can like get to know this better over time. Even if
Yeah.
it requires writing things down if you're not going to remember it.
Yep.
You know. I remember when I was young and going grocery shopping and figuring out like I don't know if this is a good price for this thing. And now if I go to some quote unquote discount whatever or see something on sale, I can still know if it's a good price because I've done lots of grocery shopping. So I think it's similar
Yes.
with like looking at flight prices and trying to figure out if they're good deals. It's like you just have to pay attention, and
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
It's great advice.
Sweet.
All right, so let's move into the final segment of our episode called Wish You Were Here. This is where Cheryl and I will each highlight a travel attraction from the many different places that we have traveled over the years and just give a little snapshot, kind of like a little postcard saying, hey, wish you were here. This is really cool. So, Cheryl, what would you like to talk about today?
So I want to share about something in Eastern Washington. I lived out there for 3 years. It's kind of smack dab in the middle of the states, but it's considered Eastern Washington because it's on the other side of the mountains. And there is a hike out there that is pretty fun and I think pretty unique. So the hike is called Cowiche Canyon. Cowiche.
Okay.
And you hike through a canyon. It's very Eastern Washington looking in the sense that like no evergreen trees. It's a desert out there. And so, but it's fun because you get to hike down into a canyon, walk along a river, and then hike back up the other side. So that's kind of a nice view and it's pretty cool. But you can hike to a winery out there, the Will Ridge Winery, and they have all these great picnic tables outside. You can do a tasting, or you can just buy a glass of wine or some cider or something else from them. And so what I've done is I will pack my picnic lunch, hike there, buy some wine, and then sit out and drink wine and have my picnic, and then hike back. And it's pretty fun. I really enjoy just being able to like hike to somewhere where I can, do a tasting, which is something I love to do. And so it's kind of a fun combination of nature and civilization. And yeah, so I would say if you're in the Yakima area in Eastern Washington, check that out.
Cool.
Yeah. How about you, Ryan?
So for me, I'm going to go just outside of London for my Wish You Were Here to the Royal Greenwich Observatory. So you can take a train from London out. I don't remember how long the train is, like 20 minutes maybe. It's not super far. And it'll take you out to this beautiful, beautiful area that has like this big, huge, I think they call it a mall, kind of like, the National Mall in Washington, D.C., where it's a big lawn that just has lots and lots of grass. But that, and then there's a couple of buildings and things, and the observatory is there. And of course, I'm biased because I really enjoy astronomy. But the other thing that's really cool about the Royal Greenwich Observatory is where the Prime Meridian goes. The Prime Meridian runs through there.
Really?
Yes. So
I thought
0
it just,
degrees
went through the
of
ocean
longitude.
or something.
Well, it also goes through the ocean because most of the surface of the Earth is ocean. So I don't know. They've kind of changed it, what they call it now. But GMT, if you're looking at times, like time zones, GMT used to be what they did all time zones based off of. And it's now, I don't remember what it's, UTC, Universal Coordinated Time, or something like that, I believe. But it's the same thing. But GMT was for Greenwich Mean Time. So Greenwich is where they set time zones based off of, as well as the 0 degrees of longitude. And so you can actually go up to, there's a spot where they have a line and you can stand in both the eastern and western hemispheres at the same time. They have the official time clock for the world there, but they also have an actual observatory where they've got, exhibits and kind of a museum, and there's of course astronomical things, and it's just a really, really cool kind of day trip outside of London. You could do it in an afternoon if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be a full day, but you head out there. There's a bunch of other things to see kind of on the waterfront down there and stuff like that. But it's really cool, and it's one of the places that, at least for me, is on my list to go back to.
Wow, really?
Oh, yeah. I definitely want to go back.
Really?
Yeah. Because I went when I was 18. So the first time that I went to London, we went out there, and it was really cool. But I'd really love to go back. And part of it is because I know so much more about it now. I think I actually would enjoy it even more than when I was there the first time, because I know so much more about astronomy and about just the Earth and how it works and how it's put together and things like that. So I think there'd be even more for me to enjoy.
Wow. That's fun. I like that. Man, now I gotta go there. Add it to the list.
Add it to the list for sure. Okay, that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully these tips were helpful. Please find us on social media. We are at Timwi Podcast, TMWI Podcast, and let us know, are these tips helpful? Do you have some suggestions on finding good flights or things to maybe not do? You can definitely tag us in the social media and let us know.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us your travel questions, maybe some of your travel tips, suggestions on guests, and more.
Absolutely. You can also send us all of that same information on our Timwi phone number. That's 406-763-8699, or if it's easier to remember, 406-POD Timwi. You can either leave us a voicemail or send us a text message. We would also really appreciate it if you would rate and review us on whatever thing you are listening to this podcast on right now, as that helps other people find out about our podcast. Please share us on social media, and if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe.
Thank you, as always, to Beth Reed Miller for our awesome artwork. You can check out more of her artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can check out Erica's music wherever music is sold.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat, chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe. Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles here want them to be